So today we're going to cover the topic of communicating and negotiating inspection repairs. Those of you that are currently in the business right now, you know what an important part of the process it is. Got a lot of great information to cover with you today. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to show you how Clearly Closing can help you to guide your buyers and sellers through this process. And then at the very end, we're going to take some questions. So if you have any questions along the way, please type those questions. You've got a little Q&A button up at the top. So type your question in there, and at the very end, we will be sure to answer them for you. And as a bonus for attending today's webinar, we're going to provide you with a helpful guide to give to your buyers called the Home Inspection Guide for Buyers. So for you tuning in today, you're going to get a follow-up email with a recording of this webinar along with this extra material we're going to give to you. So in well over 90% of any home, 90% of the transactions out there, the buyer is going to have an inspection on the property. Rare exceptions are when maybe for an investor property, they're buying the home as is and they don't want to have an inspection. But for the vast majority of homes, there's going to be an inspection and there's going to be a subsequent negotiation on what was found and negotiation on the repairs. This is what I call the second round of negotiations. First round of negotiations is to get that property under contract. Second round of negotiations is getting through this inspection period and this repair request period. So knowing how to properly communicate how this process happens to your buyer and to your seller can really help you to keep your sales on track, because this is a common place for deals to fall out. And so knowing how to negotiate them and handle them can really help you to sell more houses in the end. Here's a timeline of kind of the process from beginning to end of how this inspections and the repair negotiations and repairs take place. And then this presentation is going to break this down into individual sections on how to handle each of these steps. To begin with, you've got your buyer and seller consultation, explaining to them what's about to happen. And then you got the inspections on the home. And the seller has certain responsibilities too about how the home has to be made available for inspections. Then there's going to be some sort of repair request. In all likelihood, the buyer's going to ask for some repairs and the seller's going to respond to them. You have to finalize the paperwork to make sure that contractually you have everything buttoned up. The repairs need to be done, and then the buyer does a walkthrough. So let's break that down into individual steps now. So first of all, for your buyer consultation, when you first start working with a buyer, it's really good to explain to them how this process works from beginning to end, and mainly how the option period works. That option period is the best protection that the buyer has for the entire contract. So the length of the option period depends on what they negotiate, but normally it's somewhere to 5 to 15 days, and that's the time that the buyer is going to have those inspections and negotiate any repairs. So make sure the buyer is aware of that. Also let them know that there may be multiple inspections that they need to order, depending on the type of property. They're definitely going to want to have a general home inspection, and that covers basically from roof to the foundation, and the inspectors look at all the major systems of the house. But in addition to that, the buyer's probably going to want to have a termite inspection. And if there's a pool, they're going to want a pool inspection, and a well, and a septic system. So there may be more than one inspection that's necessary, so make sure your buyer is aware of all the inspections that they need to have. Now, who is authorized to do these inspections? In our 1 to 4 family residential contracts, paragraph 7 addresses this, and it says that only those who are licensed by TREC, Texas Real Estate Commission, or otherwise permitted by law to make the inspections are allowed to do the inspection. So you can't really have your brother-in-law or the buyer's brother-in-law coming out and doing the inspection just because he knows a lot about houses. Make sure that it's an authorized person, and there's a reason for this. These guys are trained in how to do these inspections, and you definitely want a professional on hand to do those. Provide a buyer a copy of a blank inspection report. When you first start working with them, let them know what they are going to be inspecting. This is the TREC required inspection report, and this is a blank one. And you can actually get a copy of this to provide to your buyer so they can see what all is going to be inspected. And then they have a good idea of everything that's going to be looked at. It's a nice little customer service tip for you to provide this to your buyer ahead of time before they ever even have the inspection done. So that's the buyer consultation. Now, what about the seller consultation? If you're on the seller side of the equation here, same thing with the seller. Walk through the process with them, explain to them ahead of time what's about to happen. hey, you know what, the buyer, they're probably going to have an option period, this unrestricted right to terminate. During that time, they're going to send some inspectors out here to look at the property. They can, they're probably going to ask you for some repairs. You don't have to do the repairs, but they don't have to buy the house. So we're probably going to have to do some negotiations on repairs, and we just need to be prepared for that. The utilities have to be on. This is actually part of our contract too, that the utilities to the property need to be turned on. And this can be a big deal. For instance, if they don't have the gas turned on, sometimes on vacant properties, seller wants to save a little money. Hey, I don't want to turn the gas on. Inspector goes out, inspects everything and says, oh, I can't inspect the heater, the water heater, or the furnace because the gas isn't on. This will most certainly delay things and cause you to have to extend the option period unnecessarily and maybe delay some things on down the line. So make sure the seller has all the utilities on. It's actually part of their contractual obligation to do so. Now, the inspections on the home. So now we're at the point where the inspectors are coming out. A question I often get, should the agents be there during the inspection? Here's my opinion. There's nothing that prohibits the agents from being present. There's nowhere, nowhere written that says the agents can't be there during the inspection. But my opinion is it's better if they're not there, because you don't want to give the appearance that you're unduly influencing the inspector in any way. The inspection really should be between the inspector and the buyer, to let the buyer ask questions of the inspector, have some time to really go through it with them without any outside influences. And an agent being present can sometimes cause an outside influence, which will just potentially make things a little muddier. So there's nothing to prohibit you. My opinion is it's better if you're not there. The inspector may also recommend some follow-up inspections. So when you get the inspection report back, when the buyer gets that inspection report back, if the inspector found some sort of deficiency, like maybe the air conditioner wasn't cooling properly, they will require or recommend, they will recommend that an HVAC technician come out and re-inspect the property. In our first webinar, we talked about top 5 contract mistakes, and we talked about how important it is to get your inspections ordered early, as soon as possible. I mean, as soon as you get that contract executed, get your inspections ordered. That way, you'll probably have it done in the next 2, 3, maybe 4 days, and you still have time for some follow-up inspections and time to negotiate the repairs on down the road too. So just be aware of that. Now, the seller's responsibilities during this time is that seller's responsibility during this time is to grant access for multiple inspections. I see a few folks have raised their hand. I want to make sure that everybody's still good. If you have a question, let me just say right now, if you have a question, type that question into the Q&A section up at the top, and then we're going to answer them all at the end. Next is to be prepared to grant access for multiple inspections. So the seller needs to know that there may be a lot of people coming out, or 3, 4 different inspectors coming out, and just so they're aware of that. The repair request. Now's where the fun begins. The buyer has had their inspections done, and now they've met with the agent, and they want to they're meeting with the agent about getting their repair request in order. A buyer, those of you that have been selling real estate for a while, no doubt you've run into this. You have a buyer that says, what should I ask for? What's important? Hey, is this a big deal? What's most, should we ask for this and not for this? My caution to you is do not get involved in those conversations and what they should or should not ask for. We are licensed real estate agents. We are not licensed inspectors. We are not licensed repair people, and we shouldn't dip our toes in that water, so to speak. Best thing to do is to direct the buyer back to the inspector and let them make that determination with the inspector. And we just tell the buyer, look, our job is to ask for what you want. We can't determine what's most, what you should or shouldn't ask for. You tell us what you want, we'll submit the request and negotiate for you along those lines. Any repairs that are asked for need to be clearly articulated on an amendment to the contract. Now, if you haven't seen this yet in your schooling, you will see it soon. The amendment to the contract allows you to amend the original agreement. And in this case, we're going to type the repairs in this section here in number 2, exactly what the buyer is requesting. That's done on the amendment. Sometimes you have to use additional sheets if there's too many items to fit in that one area. Here's a little tip. Supply the inspection report for documentation. So whenever you ask for those repairs, either supply the whole inspection report or the page of the inspection report that correspond to the repairs that they've asked for. So the buyers asked for these repairs. How can the seller respond? Well, they got some options. They can deny them all. They could say, no, we came down on the price 10%. We're not doing anything. That's certainly the seller's right to do that. They can agree to all of it. Hey, we'll fix everything. We want you to have this house. Of course, they can agree to some and deny some mixture of the two. They can offer some sort of closing cost assistance in lieu of doing the repair. Say, look, we'll give you $200, let's say, instead of doing that repair to the rotten wood on the back of the house. And of course, they can also offer some sort of price reduction in lieu of doing a repair or any combination thereof. So here's a tip, and I found this to be very, very helpful. When a buyer submits a request, especially if there's a lot of different items, your seller's natural response is to say no. You know, a lot of times you have sellers just say no. You know, we've come down off the price, and now they're asking for all these things. My recommendation, just from what I found, many times buyers ask for a lot of things, expecting to do some negotiation sometimes. So the best way for the seller to respond is to each item categorically, individually. So if there's 10 things they've asked for, the seller needs to at least respond to and say, we won't do this for the following reason. We will do this, and we'll give you some money for this. I found this to be very, very helpful in keeping the deal together. What we're trying to do is keep the parties, keep the transaction moving forward, certainly getting our clients what they want, but also keeping emotions in check. You know, when a buyer asks for a lot of things and the seller just says no, sometimes it turns the buyer off and they'll end up walking away when, 15, 20 minutes of a thoughtful response would have kept that deal together. So just a little tip for you there. So in finalizing the paperwork, you want to make sure to execute the amendment prior to the option period, and you have to extend it if necessary. Remember, 5:00 p.m. on the last day of the option period. After that, the buyer no longer has an unrestricted right to terminate. So you want to make sure you have all those repair items negotiated by then. Execute that amendment. If you're not going to have it done by then, you have to extend the option period using that same amendment. Okay. If the seller doesn't agree to extend the option period, the buyer can either move forward without getting a repair request in or terminate the contract. It's up to them at that point. But regardless, something needs to be decided before that option period ends. Little side tip here, a little liability protection for you is have the buyer initial each page of the inspection report. Believe it or not, sometimes buyers, they will claim they never saw the report or they didn't get that page, something like that. I know the broker that I work for, we require all the buyer to initial each page of the inspection report to make sure that there's documentation that they received each and every page. So for repair completion, what's required? Well, first of all, there's only certain individuals that are authorized to do the repairs. And if you look at paragraph 7F in our contract, it says that these persons must be licensed to provide the repairs and treatments or commercially engaged in the trade of doing those repairs and treatments. So that's right in the contract. Make sure your seller understands that's their responsibility to have those types of individuals doing the repairs. But what about that seller that's pretty handy and said, look, I can fix that rotten wood in the back of the house. I'm real handy. The seller can do those repairs himself or herself if the buyer agrees to it. So what you have to do is document that on the amendment. When you ask for those repairs to be done, make sure it's written on the amendment that the seller is doing those repairs. Get the buyer to sign off on it, get the seller to sign off on it, and then that supersedes the language that I just showed you that's in the contract. Also, the seller should keep all the repair receipts to provide them to the buyer so that you have clear documentation of who did the repairs, and then the buyer has somebody they can call after closing if there's an issue with that repair that was done. Buyer should also request any transferable warranties be documented before closing. So if say an air conditioning repair was done and there's a warranty on the work, get all that transferable warranty information over to the buyer before closing. That way, after closing, everything's all nice and tied up for your buyer. The walkthrough. So when to do a walkthrough. And just a walkthrough, just so you know, is the opportunity for the buyer to go through the property, do a visual inspection before they go to closing to make sure that the repairs were done that were supposed to be done. Just make sure everything looks okay. There's no additional damage or anything like that. My recommendation is to do it a day or two ahead of time. Why? If you do the walkthrough an hour before closing, What if there's something wrong? What if there's something that needs to be, that wasn't repaired that's supposed to be? You got no time to work it out. Do that walkthrough a day or two ahead of time, leaves you time to renegotiate anything if you have to. Now, you're going to want to document the walkthrough on the buyer's walkthrough and acceptance form. This is something provided by the Texas Association of Realtors. If you are a Realtor member, which most of you are or will be, this form will be available to you. And this form states whether or not the buyer had inspections and whether or not they did a walkthrough on the property, and the buyer signs off on it. It also gives a little protection for the broker and the agents here in this final paragraph. Very good form for you to use as a buyer's agent to protect you and to protect your broker in the end, that the buyer had the opportunity to do that walkthrough before closing. Let the seller know well in advance of the walkthrough. I'm telling you, if you call the seller or the listing agent to contact the seller the day of the walkthrough, they're going to freak out on you. You need to let them know well ahead of time that the buyer's coming through, because they may be in the middle of packing or something like that. About a week or so ahead of time, say, hey, here's when we're going to do our walkthrough before we go to closing. Trust me, things work out much better that way. Stress level stays down. Things are stressful enough. Let's keep it down when we can. So it's our duty. We have a professional responsibility to advise and negotiate in the best interest of our clients. And so part of this is making sure that our buyers and sellers understand all the stuff that we just went over in this presentation here. It's important that they understand this before they go under contract, and keep them advised all the way through the contract period. And I'm going to show you now how Clearly Closing software helps you to meet that need. So when you look at the home screen of Clearly Closing, you'll see that it allows you to input buyer transactions and seller transactions to specify what kind of transaction it is. If we look at what's included in a buyer transaction, I'll click on one here. What you'll see is what I call the transaction window. And when I click on Invite Client, it's going to send an email to my buyer, where when they click on that link, this box right here with all of this information will appear. Now, what's in this box? When I click on Getting Started, you'll see that it has multiple FAQs and information to communicate to your buyer, including information about having inspections on the home, information that we just covered. We have a link here to an inspection report to provide to the buyer ahead of time. It's already built into the system for you. One thing I found in 18 years in this business, we have to communicate the same thing to buyers and sellers every single time. We got to go over the same information. So we built a system to make it efficient for you to easily communicate this information to your buyers and sellers. They'll have access to it on their smartphone, their computer, their laptop. They'll have access to exactly what you're seeing here. And if you want to email any section individually, you click on that little email button and it will send just that section to them. Now, there's other information regarding the home inspection for buyers. Click on this inspection tab. There's a reminder for them to order their inspections, how the repair requests work, and then finally, there's also a reminder to them about preparing to close and doing a walkthrough on and the importance of doing a walkthrough on the property. So you see the information that we just went over, it's built into the system for you to communicate to your buyer. Now, on the seller side, there's similar information, but it's geared specifically towards the seller. You also see that with Clearly Closing, you can create a timeline specific to your buyer and seller's contract that gives you reminders on all the critical dates that are coming up, like the option period, like the buyer's walkthrough. So you, as the agent, will get a text reminder of all upcoming dates. Your client will have access to this timeline and the You Are Here arrow so they can follow their transaction all the way through the process. And then finally, one other item, if I click on the seller here, I want to show you how you can store documents related to your transaction. This is actually a transaction I have going right now. So for your clients, you can store any documents related to the transaction within the system. You see here I have a contract and their inspection report actually stored here for me to access and for the client to access too. If I want to upload a new document, I simply go to my desktop here and I have the seller's disclosure which I want to upload. I save it. Takes just a few seconds depending on the size of the document, but then once it's uploaded, it's there and available for both you and your client to access from any device at any time. So that's a brief overview of how Clearly Closing can help you communicate this information, but as you see, there's a ton more information in here that you can communicate to your buyers and sellers already built into the system. what I ask you to do is to go to champions.clearlyclosing.com, champions.clearlyclosing.com. You can learn more about the software there. You can take a free trial, watch a video on the software. It's very, very affordable, only $120 for a 16-month subscription if you're tuning into this webinar. It's a crutch to walk you and your client through each step from contract to closing, repair negotiations, and many other things too. Send you important contract timeline alerts, and it will act as your personal assistant, keeping you organized, productive, efficient. One thing, important thing is, depending on the broker you work for, they may provide you with some transaction software. Remember though, if you ever leave that broker, you have to leave that software there, and you very well may have to leave the data that's in that software there too. With Clearly Closing, you can always take that information with you anywhere you go, no matter where you work. Okay, I have got, if you have any questions, right now we're going to move into the Q&A section, so be sure to type any questions that you have, and we're going to jump on them here in just a second. Here's a couple of common questions. Won't the home warranty cover any repair items? The short answer to that is no. The home warranty will not likely cover any pre-existing conditions, so what you never, never, never want to do is to tell the buyer, hey, don't worry about that item. The home warranty is going to cover it, because it probably won't. What if the lender requires additional repairs? Well, remember that the repairs that are agreed upon during the option period may not be the only repairs that come up. The lender is going to send an appraiser out there to do their own inspection on the property, and they may require some additional repairs. That has to be negotiated separately at that time. You may have to come up with any repairs that are negotiated. Will take another amendment. Do the repairs have to be completed during the option period? No, they just have to be done by closing, and make sure your seller is aware of that. So in conclusion here, I want to tell you about the next upcoming webinar. We've got webinars scheduled for the rest of the year on important contract tips. So the next upcoming webinar is what you need to know about closing costs and closing cost assistance. And that's Thursday, September 28th from 1 to 1:30. So what we're going to cover there is that the fact of the matter is many times buyers ask for closing costs, and there's specific ways those need to be negotiated depending on the type of loan that the buyer gets. That has some relevance too. So that's going to be our next webinar, and we will be sending you an invitation to that. And be sure to share these invitations with other agents and your broker so we can spread this information around and all be on the same page when it comes to negotiating our contracts. If you have any questions, please email me at andy@clearlyclosing.com. That's andy@clearlyclosing.com. Happy to answer any questions you have. And be sure to go to champions.clearlyclosing.com to sign up for your free trial of Clearly Closing software to see how it can benefit you in regards to the topic we covered today and in many other areas as well. Thank y'all very much for tuning in. Y'all have a real productive day. If you're still in school, keep it up. You're going to be done soon. You'll be out there hitting the streets selling. If you're already out there selling, good luck. Hope you sell a house today. Y'all take care.